Community-minded, locally focused. We're localwebradio.fm.
Do you enjoy a nice glass of wine? Do you want to know more about wine pairing or the process of how wine is made? Welcome to From the Vine to the Wine with wine expert and connoisseur Matt Brzovic. Now, here's your host.
Hi, I'm your host, Kimberly Henrie, and I'm here with Matt Brzovic, your local wine expert with over a decade of experience. And today we're talking with Matt about aging wines, where we will answer a common question: how long will my red wine last in the cellar? Matt, it's great to be talking with you today.
You as well, Kimberly.
I look forward to learning how long to age wine and recommendations that you have for storage. We've had some great conversations already, and I know that this is going to be very informative.
Well, I'm looking forward to it too.
So we've talked about red wines. We've talked about some common versus some not so common wines. And you've alluded in the past in our conversations to the technique of aging wine. Is it a technique, a skill, or just practical knowledge?
Well, it's a little bit of practical knowledge and experimentation that's going to help you to learn which wines are going to be able to age for any period of time and which ones won't. If we start, say, for example, and take a look at the wines that are on our market shelves today, probably, I'd say most of the wines that are under $20 in the stores are made to drink within the first year of their life. If you go a little farther and listen to one of the most respected wine writers in the world and a master of wine herself, Jancis Robinson, she would say that it's 10% of all red wines and probably 5% of white wines can improve significantly with aging. The rest of them generally can't. Most of the wines, like I said, they're meant to drink young, not to put away. But there are definitely exceptions, and there are certain wines that will age for periods of time. So if we take a look, for example, in red wines, classified Bordeaux, Grand Cru Burgundy, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Syrah is another grape that can age, Zinfandel, or even Nebbiolo and Sangiovese in Barolo and Brunello, respectively. Those are wines in red that can really age for significant periods of time. If you look at white wines, any wine that's affected by botrytis or noble rot, so things like sauternes, those can definitely age, and good Chardonnays, good Rieslings, and Chenin Blanc, I would say even Semillon, Hunter Valley Semillon from Australia, those would be the whites that really could improve with age.
What qualities specifically does a wine need to have to be age-worthy? How do you pick those?
Well, technically, it's actually the ratio of sugars, acids, and phenolics to water in a wine. That's the key factor for how long a wine will actually age. But, for our consumers, I have a kind of a shortcut, the way that I look at it, is that it needs basically four things. It needs to have a good level of acidity. It needs to have some tannin. Alcohol would be the third thing. And finally, for me, this is a personal preference, a little bit of fruit. You want some fruit there in the beginning because as it ages, it's not going to magically grow fruit. It has to be there. The fruit will naturally come down. The acidity will come down and the tannin will all come down and change the wine slowly as that chemical reaction happens into something that's more pleasant down the road than it was at the beginning.
So is there a particular temperature that is ideal to store wine at when you're aging it like this?
Well, most people believe that 55 or 56 degrees Fahrenheit is the ideal temperature. That would be 13 degrees Celsius. Now, the lower the temperature is, the more slowly the wine will evolve. You can have the temperature a little bit higher, say at 60 degrees, but it will evolve at a slightly quicker rate. It's every 18 degrees Fahrenheit doubles the speed of the chemical reaction in the wine. So that's going to make a big difference. What temperature you have it at greatly affects the final wine. You want it to evolve as slowly as possible to get the best finished product.
So that being said, how long should I store my wine, and how do I know when it's optimal to drink?
Well, like I said before, experimentation is one of the things. So to give you an example, I had a wine, I think it was about 3 years ago. It was a Côte de Rhône at $22. It had all of the characteristics that I just talked about, but it didn't have a huge acidity, but there was a nice acidity there. There was good tannin. There was a nice amount of fruit, and the alcohol was at about 13.5, 14. And I put the wine, basically I didn't put it away. I just left it for a year and drank a bottle every month over the year. So 12 months later, the last bottle tasted better than the one before. So I had more of that vintage around. I bought another case, and this time I left it for 2 months each time I drank a bottle. And by the time I got to the end of those 2 years, the wine was fantastic, but I could tell on the last bottle it was slowly starting to go. The color had changed slightly. And through experimentation, you get to know which wines are going to be the ones that will last longer for you.
Okay, so you mentioned 4 qualities earlier. Can you kind of break those down for us again? Just refresh us on that. And then tell me, how would I know whether a wine has those qualities?
Well, for example, acidity is one of those things that you can taste in a wine. It's what makes you salivate when you drink a wine. Acidity being too low, you're going to have a flabby wine. It's going to be kind of boring. There's nothing there. And if the acidity is too high, it can be a little sharp and hard to drink. So it's finding that balance in there. But again, that acidity is going to preserve the wine over the long period of time. If you go to tannin, for example, so tannin it's that bitter kind of taste that you get out of tea. Same kind of thing happens in wine. The skins will impart, the pips, and sometimes the stems will impart a tannin to the wine. And this is kind of a drying effect. But again, it acts as a preservative, and it helps with the phenolic level of the wine, the phenols in there. Oak, for example, can also add some of those qualities too. So if you have a oaked wine, it can also, a little bit longer, you're looking again in the cellar, usually, not always. Mm-hmm. The alcohol level, an alcohol level of 12% is not going to be enough there to really preserve that wine long term, depending on what the wine is. Obviously, Rieslings, that would be a fairly hefty level of alcohol for a Riesling. But most red wines, you're probably, I shouldn't say, it's 13.5, 14%. Higher than that, you're getting a very high level of alcohol that's going to hold that wine for a longer period. And as I said before, fruit is, again, part of the makeup of the wine and those compounds that are in the wine. And if there's very little fruit there, it can be a dry wine, but I like that little bit of fruit to peek through, because at the end, it's going to come down a little bit, and it's going to make that wine a little better as a whole, rounded and kind of the way it should be.
Okay, very, very helpful. And it would be a lot of fun to explore that, to just try different wines and see if you can test your ability to break down those qualities.
There is another thing, and that's the fact that I always suggest to people to buy, if you can afford it, 3 bottles of a wine, mm-hmm. or 6 or 12. Mm-hmm. And the reason is that you can now try the wine as it evolves, rather than, for example, spending a lot of money on a wine, putting it in your cellar. The rating says it's going to last 15 years. You leave it for 15 years. You don't touch it faithfully. And when you do open it up, it's gone past its prime. You want to be trying it as it goes along so that you can see how it's maturing.
Wonderful journey. I'm sure that is. We've got more questions for Matt Brzovic. In just a few moments, we'll be continuing on our discussion about aging wines right after the break.
More From the Vine to the Wine with Matt Brzovic after this.
If you're struggling with a dental or oral health issue, be sure to catch the Healthy Smiles Oral Health Show with Dr. Norm Ickard on the Health Channel on localwebradio.fm.
Shopping for the lowest mortgage rate? Looking to refinance? Catch the Mortgage Newscast with Jared Dreyer on the Business Channel on localwebradio.fm.
Hillcrest Bakery and Deli presents Old Time Radio on the Specialty Channel on localwebradio.fm.
Now, back to From the Vine to the Wine with Matt Brzovic.
And we're back with wine expert Matt Brzovic. Matt, we're talking about aging wines today. So if I'm looking to begin to explore my wine inventory, do I need to build a cellar or buy a wine fridge? Or what is the best way to store my wines?
Well, ideally, we'd all love to have a cellar in our basement or built somewhere, but it tends to be a little bit expensive, and it's not really within all our budgets. yeah, it's a fantastic thing if you can get it. But if not, you don't need one. Now, some of the other options are wine fridges. I've had a lot of questions about wine fridges, how effective they are, and I think they're great for storing wine for the short term. But if you're going to store your wine for a long term, there's a little bit of a question as to whether or not the vibration of the wine fridge is going to affect the wine as it ages over time. Now, if you can get a wine fridge, I'm sure for the right amount of money, there's a wine fridge out there that doesn't vibrate at all. But at the lower end of the scale, they definitely do have a lot of vibration to them. And fine to store your wine, for a few weeks before the party, or to have something in the fridge to drink regularly. But as a storage medium, I think it's less than ideal. Mm. Now, in your house, if you can find a place that's cool, dark, and the temperature stays constant, that would probably be the best place to store your wine. And it really doesn't matter if it's a closet, if it's the area under your stairs, downstairs in the basement. The key is those three things to make sure that the wine stays, if possible, at the same temperature, that there aren't wild fluctuations, that no light is going to reach the wine. UV rays are bad for wine. If it can get heated, that's another reason, but it'll definitely ruin the wine over time. So yeah, a closet will work perfectly as long as it's one of those places that has all those qualities to it. Nice and cool, constant temperature. And again, if you have your wine at 55 degrees or 60 or 65, it's still going to age fine. Just keep in mind that the higher the temperature, the quicker that it's going to age.
Okay, so the higher temperature, quicker aging. And is there too low a temperature to store wine?
Generally, you don't want your wines to get down to a temperature anywhere near freezing, but below 50 degrees, I would say I probably wouldn't go lower than that. You definitely want to keep them in that 50 and higher temperature, but 55 would be the ideal place.
Okay. So now, for those of us who may be just beginning to explore holding on to your wine, aging wine, and don't want to wait 10 years to drink your first aged bottle, are there wines that mature earlier?
Yes, there definitely are. As I was talking before, a lot of the wines in our stores under $20. Not all of them. There are exceptions, but most of those wines are meant to drink young. As you start going up a little bit in price, you start to find wines that have more of these qualities that we've been talking about. And as you drink more of them, you will get the idea of the ones that will benefit from 2, 3, 4 years of aging. And I'm sure as you have some of those really good wines, you'll see the ones that would benefit from, a longer period of time. So what we're actually talking about this week dovetails quite nicely into our 2 wines of the week. These 2 wines are both wines that I think over 2 to 4 years are going to be fantastic. Maybe it'll last a little bit longer than that, but I think that's the optimal time. So the first one we're going to talk about briefly is Crognolo. It's an Italian IGT. It's a 2011 vintage. This wine is basically 90% Sangiovese and 10% Merlot. It's a very impressive wine that I discovered at the wine festival this year in Vancouver. And it has all of the qualities we're talking about. The acidity isn't too high, though. The tannins aren't overdone. It's in exactly the right place for aging in that 2 to 4 year period. The wine itself has a beautiful nose of blackberries, black currants, and a little bit of a flowery aspect. There might be a little acacia in there. Medium to full body, very, very fine tannins, and a nice long finish. I love the kind of interplay in there between cherries and kind of tart cherries and black olives. It really is a great wine that got 95 points from James Suckling. Extremely good score, and at $36, an excellent wine to buy 6 of and put away and experiment a little with, especially if you love those Tuscan wines from Italy. Now, the other wine is Les Halos de Jupiter. It's a 2011 Côte de Rhône, and it's a little bit less. It's $23.99, but there's a couple of reasons I picked this wine. This wine's 85% Grenache, 10% Syrah, and 5% Mourvèdre. Now, this wine comes in at a stunning 15.5% alcohol. That's a lot of alcohol for a wine, but when you taste it, you find that it's very well contained. And that alcohol is what's going to preserve it over the next 3 to 4 years and allow this wine to get a little bit better. It's got a little bit of fruit in there. It's got the tannin. There's not enough tannin in there to go long term, but there's definitely enough substance there. The wine's big, full-bodied, a very sensual style Côte de Rhône. Raspberries, cassis. It's got a little bit of lavender on the nose as well. A little bit of smokiness, but just a gorgeous wine to drink now. But I would say this wine over 2 to 4 years is going to taste just superb.
Wonderful recommendations. Matt, thanks so much for sharing your insight in how to age and store wine. I'm sure folks will enjoy the blends you've recommended. I look forward to speaking with you again next week, where we'll be discussing sulfites found in wine. Now, if you have questions, comments, or want to get Matt's recommendations, you can find him on Twitter at @VineToTheWine. If you enjoyed what you learned here today, we also invite you to subscribe by clicking on the subscribe link in the show notes. Matt, again, thanks so much.
My pleasure as always, Kimberly.
You've been listening to From the Vine to the Wine with Matt Brzovic on the Lifestyle Channel on localwebradio.fm.
Local stories, local voices. We're localwebradio.fm.
This episode is a production of Jam Media. For information on hosting your own web radio show, visit jammedia.com. That's www.jambmedia.com.
The opinions expressed by our guest and host on localwebradio.fm do not necessarily reflect the views of Jam Media or its owners. No expressed or implied opinions of any product or service should be considered an endorsement or recommendation of any kind by Jam Media or its owners.